So welcome everyone to our study skills session this evening. My name is Lauren Lobdell. I am the Vice President of Client Services for Tutor.com, a service of the Princeton Review. I'm going to be moderating the session this evening, kind of helping with some questions. Behind the scenes, one of our colleagues, Marcus, is going to be helping with questions as well. We're very excited to present this special session as an encore series. We've hosted the student success workshops in the fall and in the summer of last year because given the situation out there, it's been a really hard time for those of you who are students or educators or parents, and everybody could use a little extra help. So we host these sessions as free webinars to hopefully help you with some of your academic needs, especially in this COVID period. So we hope that this information is helpful to you, and we record every session, so you will have access to a recording after the session ends. It is my pleasure to introduce our real presenter for today, Dr. Amy Dietzman, who is on our Learning Services team. She is our Learning and Design Manager, and she's an expert in student success. She helps create some of our student success tutoring subjects that we offer to individuals who use the Tutor.com service through their public libraries, through the military, through your employee benefits programs, through higher education institutions. We work with a lot of partners, so I am assuming most of you may have heard about our session through one of those institutions that offers you access to Tutor.com for free. So we offer some tutoring subjects to help you with your one-to-one needs that you might have around student success topics. But Amy gives us some of our broad topics. So she's going to go ahead and take over here. And again, if you have questions, put those into the question box. Amy?
Great, thank you. So, hi, I'm Amy Dietzman. I'd love to tell you just a little bit about myself as I start. I work full-time for Tutor.com. I also work as an adjunct professor for Arizona State University and for Grand Canyon University. And I love talking about student success. I have taught college-level student success courses, and I'm also speaking to you today from experience. I consider myself a successful student. I earned 3 degrees, all while working full-time, and 2 of those degrees I earned with 2 young kids at home. I learned from my own mistakes and from observations of my own kids and my students, and I figured out some cool strategies, and so now I get to talk about those with you. So today I'm going to share some helpful tips for study sessions, and we're going to talk very specifically about note-taking and test-taking. I'm also going to talk to you about how wellness techniques connect to your studying strategies. But no matter your age, middle school, high school, college, grad school, or beyond, maybe you're a traditional student, maybe you're an adult student going back to school after many years, you can learn something from these tips. Many come from my own experiences, and many are research-based. These tips might seem obvious, but they might not. But either way, what I hope is that these are good reminders. And as I talk, I'd like you to ask yourself, am I doing these things? And if you're not doing these things, maybe you could try. So let's start with all the things you need to do before you even start studying. Before you settle in for a session, designate a study area. Make sure your space has all the supplies you'll need, has good light, and set yourself up with your drink and maybe a snack so you don't have to stop once you really get your flow. The key to successful studying is focus and trying to eliminate distractions and interruptions. So get rid of those obvious distractions like turning off your alerts and your reminders and your email. If things pop up on your phone or your watch or your computer, turn all of that off. Put your phone on silent, and my best tip is to leave it in a different room. You won't be tempted to look at it if it isn't close to you. Sit in a place where you won't be distracted by your family members or friends or people talking, loud music, etc. And make a plan and set a goal. Have an end goal for that time that you've designated and know exactly what you want to accomplish. You'll waste time if you have to sit down and then sort through all your assignments and your classwork and then figure out where you should start and what you need to do and making a list, all of those things. It's really important that you schedule your week ahead of time because it's a good way for that study time to become just study time and not getting organized time. And then reward yourself when you finish a good session. If you've met your goal, stop, take a deep breath. Think about what you've accomplished. Think about how it feels to have met your goal. And then celebrate this small or maybe really big victory. For me, knowing the reward ahead of time was my motivation. I like to think about what I was going to do when I finished my study session long before I even started it. So everything I tell you today requires discipline. Completing a degree, finishing an AP class, studying for the SAT, taking a real estate exam, whatever, it takes commitment and discipline. You have to commit to yourself that you're going to do it and you're going to be a success. So my students always have good intentions. At the beginning of every class, I ask them to answer this question. What is your strategy for completing your work on time in this class? They are notorious for saying things like, I'm really going to try to study Monday through Friday and not procrastinate. I want to keep my weekends open, but I'm working part-time right now and I'm on the tennis team and I have an internship and I know I'm going to struggle with this. And when I read that, my first thought is, well, you didn't even start and you already came up with your excuses. You already gave yourself an out and you already said, I'm probably not going to be successful. So make your intentions real habits. On average, it takes 66 days to form a new habit. So give yourself time to form that good study habit. Bad habits, they are already there. You've established them. They are easier only at first. I promise you that new and better habits are easier in the long run. The first step is just to commit and believe in yourself. The next step is to be honest with yourself in terms of your studying strategies. So, is a coffee shop really the best place for you to study? If you curl up in that chair, are you likely to fall asleep? What time of day is best for your brain? Do you really perform best when you're under pressure? Can you spend an entire day studying? That's a good one. How long does it really take you to write a paper? These are questions based on things I've heard my own kids say. My sons are in high school and college, and things that I have heard from my own students. Know your brain and know how it works. Know how you learn best. If you're not sure, try different strategies to figure it out. For example, I know that I don't study well at night. I know that I don't study well when I'm hungry. I know that I don't study well for more than 3 hours at a time. I think best when I'm organized. I'm honest with myself, and I'm not going to waste time trying to study right before dinner or late at night. I'm not going to study when my house needs to be cleaned, and I'm not going to try and write a paper 3 hours before it's due. So, why you shouldn't procrastinate? Let me ask you this. Obviously, you won't be able to answer, but do you know what is wrong with this presentation? I get these kinds of submissions every term, and it's always the student who turns in their assignment at 11:59 p.m. on the day that it's due. So what's wrong with this? Well, I can tell immediately when I open it, this is a PowerPoint, that this student didn't give himself time to actually put together a visually appealing assignment. He didn't even have a title. He threw his thoughts down on a blank PowerPoint and turned it in. These are often the submissions I find that are riddled with spelling and grammar errors as well. So procrastinators, true fact, get lower grades. Those who work ahead will take the time to put something better together than a white presentation with black words, and they will probably remember to run a spell check. And in case you wonder what's wrong with this, well, my little tip for you is that a PowerPoint presentation should always have images and colors. So let's talk about the damage of all-nighters, because it's really connected to being a procrastinator. I've never been able to pull an all-nighter, honestly, but students do it all the time. Studies show that a lack of sleep has effects on your blood sugar, immune function, and metabolism. So how does it affect your immune function? Well, what it does is it wears you down and it exhausts you, and then you're more susceptible to getting sick. Frequent all-nighters also cause weight gain, and the reason is right there on your screen. When you pull an all-nighter, you're probably not going to eat a salad. You're probably going to eat junk food to keep yourself awake and alert. Keep in mind that you should always take tests on a good night's sleep, and without an empty stomach. So cramming all night before a test is a bad idea. Some researchers say that it takes days to recover from lost sleep, and others say that you never really recover. Point is, you're not doing yourself any favors by pulling an all-nighter. Instead, you should plan out your study schedule ahead of time, giving yourself plenty of time to study over a matter of days or even weeks before a test, rather than waiting until the night before. So consistency and routine are best. If you can schedule out your study time at the same time every day, you will get into a routine. Routine is best. But I realize that not all of you can study at the same time every day. I mean, it depends on what your work schedule is and your family life. So what you need to do is map it out for yourself. Spend the extra time it takes on Sundays to look ahead at your week. Think about your appointments, your classes, your work schedule, your commitments to your friends, your errands, and then schedule your study time. Make sure you look ahead at all your due dates and work ahead of time. But the key is to be consistent. If you say you're going to study, then you have to hold yourself to it. And remember to be honest with yourself. If you plan to go out to dinner with your friends and then you're going to go home and study, don't schedule your dinner for an hour. You know that you probably aren't just going to eat and hang out with your friends for an hour. So also remember to post your schedule every week if it changes. Have others hold you accountable, especially if you have young kids. It's really important for them to know when mom or dad is really going to be studying. Share your schedule with them, and then they know that your study time is sacred. So many researchers and professors will tell you that cramming is bad, but planned cramming is different. I found times when cramming was just what I needed, and so I'm going to tell you the truth. Cramming only works for short-term memory. It works really well for vocabulary tests and for what I call one and dones. So what I mean by a one and done is if you're taking a test and you know for a fact that you're never going to need to know that information for another class or the next test, then it's okay to cram and forget. An example was this history class that I took in college. I was not a history major, I was not a political science major, and I was taking other much more important and actually difficult classes for my major at the time. This class was at 7:30 a.m. So on test days, I used to get up super early, cram my notes, and then I would take the test, and I performed pretty well. When it was over, it was over. I don't remember any of that. When you shouldn't cram is when you have another test coming up and it builds on the knowledge from this test. So you're not doing yourself any favors if you cram before every test and you still have a final exam coming up that's cumulative. If you need to understand a concept because you're going to have to learn something more that builds on it, then cramming isn't helpful. Like if you're a nursing student and each class builds on the class before and you need to understand those concepts, then cramming is not going to help you at all. Cramming is also bad news for essay questions because cramming is only good for a shallow understanding of information. And essay questions always require a deeper understanding. So if you haven't studied thoroughly and deeply, you're going to bomb your essay questions. If you only cram, remember that you're selling your brain short. It needs time to process. You can't give it time to process new information if you cram it all in at the last minute. So how do you study the right way when you actually need to learn and not just memorize something? First of all, don't multitask. Using your phone, texting, checking social media, replying to emails, or even trying to study while you work is not effective. There is so much more research to prove that those who multitask don't give anything their full attention and therefore give every task just a percentage of what they could give it if they just focused. Multitasking causes trouble organizing thoughts. And that would be okay if you were working on something that you knew backwards and forwards. But when it comes to learning, this just doesn't work. It diminishes your ability to filter irrelevant information. So if you're like me, you want to quickly identify what's irrelevant because it cuts down on the time that you're going to spend studying. Multitasking also steals your refocusing time. So what do I mean by refocusing time? Well, it takes an average of 14 minutes to refocus completely on a task after you've answered an email or responded to a text. So all of this leads me to this big thought. Multitasking is inefficient and it takes longer. So do it right the first time. Lots of students fall into the trap of believing that rereading a chapter or re-watching a lecture will help them get the information better. And it doesn't work that way. It's better to take the information in, commit it to your mind, understand it by processing and reflecting on it, and then review it in a new way. So for example, if you watch a lecture or a video, let's say, have your notes ready. Watch a small section, then stop and jot down what you got from that. Stop the video and write down some notes. If something is confusing, Google it quickly. See if you can find a way that makes more sense. Then go back to your lecture and watch it again for a few minutes. Then repeat that same process. Same goes with reading an article. Read it once and stop throughout to talk yourself through what you just read. Take notes as you go. In addition, don't waste time reviewing what you already know. If you make flashcards, let's say, and you go through them and you know every single one of them, don't keep doing it. Take that time to review the stuff that you don't know. See, our tendency is to review the easy stuff because it gives us confidence, but it really does nothing to help you on a really hard test. Similar to what I just explained about doing it right the first time, if you attend a class in person, never sit there and just listen. Very few of us actually retain information just from hearing it, especially if it's a dry or complicated topic. Passive learning is when you just let something come to you. Sit there, listen, hope you're getting it. But being an active learner means that you're taking the information in and you're processing it and you're putting it into your own words. Maybe you're drawing a picture of it. So you're making meaning of it. So I'm going to give you some very specific steps here for how to read a text. One of the hardest things you probably have to do as a student is read a dry textbook, but there is a way to do it. If you're assigned a chapter to read, or 2 or 3, don't just open your book and start reading front to back. First, you want to preview the chapter. Flip through it. How long is it? Set your mind to what you're going to accomplish. Look at the headings and the sections, pictures, tables, and graphs. This helps your brain go, oh, okay, this is what's coming. Then read the introduction to the chapter. See, we often skip this part, but it helps put context to what's coming. And then flip to the end of the chapter and read the summary. It might not make sense because you haven't read the chapter yet, but it's going to help you when you do read to make connections. Then go back to the beginning of the first section and begin reading. Read in chunks. Read a small section. Then go to your notes and summarize in your own words what you learned. Remember not to read the whole thing all at once. Your eyes are going to start to gloss over, your mind's going to wander. You'll suddenly realize that you've read 3 pages and you didn't retain a single thing. Remember to be an active learner, which means to be an active reader. Constantly stop and talk yourself through your reading. So that seems good enough, but how do you take notes? First of all, don't over-highlight in a book. Biggest mistake students make. If you can't narrow down what's important to a phrase or 2 or a sentence or 2 on a page, then it's not worth highlighting. Plus, if you highlight, then you're tied to your textbook every time you want to study. So a notebook or the notes on your computer are much easier to open and review at a later date. Also remember that if you're highlighting, you're not forcing yourself to put it into your own words. So remember, you're not processing it. Try turning the headings of your chapter into questions, and then answer the questions with your notes below. Always put your notes into your own words. Now, I'm a big bullet list person. I like an outline style of notes where I just jot down big ideas and concepts in an outline format. I don't really write incomplete sentences, and I'm not a fan of notes that don't come easily and naturally, but that's me. So what works for you? And when you read a textbook, you should always pay special attention to vocabulary words, not just the words and their definitions. See, a lot of students just copy down words and definitions. Again, you're not processing it if you're just copying it. But you really need to focus on the context that's around that word and the overall concepts for which it's connected. So research shows we learn more from writing than we do from typing. So if you prefer to type, that's okay, start there. See if it works for you. After you take a test, look back at your notes and see if you had any of the pertinent information. If you didn't, then you know that you had difficulty identifying what was important. If you had really good typed notes and you just didn't remember any of them, then try handwriting your notes the next time and see if that works better for you. The same is true really with any kind of notes. It's good to look at them after your test to see if your notes were any good. If the test was on totally different information, you totally missed the mark, then you need to try a new strategy. But if your notes are good and you're just not retaining the information, then you may need to consider a different way of organizing your notes. So depending on the subject, this step can be critical. If you draw pictures or maps, you will be more likely to understand the connections between things. Plus, if you're a visual learner like I am, you're going to be more likely to remember that picture when you take the test. Science subjects benefit from this kind of note-taking. History subjects benefit from timelines and other types of mapped notes. Take that extra step before you take your notes to think about what kind of notes you might need. So the very best way to learn and remember something is repeated exposure. Read, take notes, review your notes, make flashcards, Google it, and find a video. Now you've seen or processed that information 5 times. You have a greater chance of remembering that information later. Now, let me tell you this though. Should you do this with every single chapter in every single unit in every single class? No. This is for difficult information that may be harder for you to retain. And keep in mind that if you take 50 pages of notes and you never look at them until a couple days before a big test, you're going to be overwhelmed. So repeated exposure in different modalities is an important step that you should do throughout your process. So again, identify those really difficult classes that you know you're struggling with and use this repeated exposure tip for that. So here's an example of what my notes looked like when I was working on a research paper. So not when I was studying for a test. First of all, I always put the APA reference above the research. So I remembered where my information came from, and so I didn't accidentally plagiarize it. Then I color coded each of my paragraphs of my paper. So the yellow research would go into my first paragraph, for example, and then the pink highlighted information would go into my second paragraph, and so on. I would just copy and paste the research directly from the source into my notes. But remember, I always put it into my own words before I added it to my paper, because if I don't do that, then I'm plagiarizing. Also, just another tip that I've noticed my students are struggling with a lot lately is quoting. They quote everything. If your whole paper is quoted, then really you've done no work. You've copied and pasted your whole paper. So think about that too. Just a little side note. So this strategy of note-taking made it really easy for me to quickly identify what notes I had for which paragraphs. So in this example, I could instantly tell that my blue paragraph needed more research. So I'd go back to finding more articles and then I'd be ready to write. Another little tip. Sometimes I found that certain paragraphs were easier to research and write than others. So if I found myself hitting a wall or getting discouraged, rather than wasting time, I would just start writing the paragraphs that made sense to me. That could be like the 4th paragraph. If it made sense, that's where I'd start. Surprisingly, once I'd get to writing, sometimes the information I thought went into one paragraph actually fit better into another. I would get momentum and then a little confidence, and before I knew it, my paper would be done. So talking through a concept is another really good way to commit it to your memory, even if you don't fully understand it at first. So you know the phrase, fake it till you make it. Well, that's what I think of when I think of this. Talking through it, even if it seems confusing and you don't quite get it, will help you to process and learn it. When I was a student, and even now, I like to walk away from something I'm working on or studying and ponder it for a while. Sometimes I'll just take my dogs for a walk and I'll think about it. Sometimes when I was writing a big paper, I'd go for a long hike. Maybe I'd find a podcast on the subject and I would listen to that so I could just think about more perspectives and think through my position or my argument some more. When you're alone, go over what you know. Try talking to yourself while you're driving. Sometimes when something is really hard, you just need to completely clear your mind. Turn on some music and go for a jog and forget about it. When you come back, your brain will be refreshed and you will have a new perspective. This is an important part of the writing process too. It's always good to walk away, think about something else, and then come back and read your paper again. I said before, there's a video for just about every topic in the world, and if you're struggling to understand something, look for a different explanation. Some people learn really well by watching videos, so find a video on the topic and see if that helps. One of the biggest mistakes students make is thinking that just reading something is enough. Reviewing your notes, like just reading them, is an important piece, but how do you know if you really know it? You have to assess yourself. You have to give yourself a test. So make flashcards, use apps, find online quizzes, test yourself to see if you really know it. And this is where study groups come in handy because you can test each other. Wellness tips are a critical component to studying, and I don't want to skip this because exercise actually increases your brain performance. So taking breaks in your study time to go for a walk or considering going to the gym right before you have a long study session, those are good ideas. For me, exercise was a reward for my studying. So whatever works for you, and I'm not telling you you have to be in the best shape of your life or work out for 3 hours, just know when your body needs to be stimulated or when you need some sunshine. And when your brain is tired, you might also consider a quick power nap. If you are worried that you're going to fall asleep for hours and you don't have hours, then hone in on that power nap skill. It's crucial for life in general. Research shows that power naps are actually more effective than long naps in helping you to feel revived and rested. So set an alarm for 20 or 30 minutes and rest. Also make sure that you're eating while you're studying, and your eating, of course, should be healthy. Your brain will function best when your diet is healthy. You've also heard all the statistics and dangers about energy drinks and soda, so just be mindful of that when you're studying. And lastly, one of the best things for your brain is music. And I don't mean music with lyrics. Classical music, piano music, is known to stimulate your brain and reduce anxiety, and can play in the background so your brain is not distracted, but completely focused on the task at hand. So it's always good to find a good study station or something you can listen to while you're studying. Before you take a test, start with a positive mindset, believing that you will succeed and envisioning yourself passing that test. But if you have taken tests before, somewhat unsuccessfully maybe, advocate for yourself. This means ask your teacher or instructor what you need to know for the test or what you could do better in terms of studying. Share your strategies with them. Tell them what you've done and ask them what you could do better. It's quite possible that your instructor will give you some amazing tips, like all the information on the tests comes from the articles, or all the essay questions are actually discussion questions from our class, or I post study guides on the resources page of the online classroom. Wow, maybe you didn't even know there was a resources page in the online classroom, and now you've learned the key to better performance. So if you find yourself discouraged in a class, I just highly recommend that you take the time to go to your professor or your teacher and say, here's what I've done, how can I do better? All of the tips I shared with you require time. Studying effectively takes time. If you're a procrastinator, will you have the time to do all these things I just said? Will you really have time to review and reflect if you've put studying off until the night before your test? Nope. And you also probably stressed yourself out in the process. Not to mention, if you don't feel prepared for a test and you feel that you're going to bomb it, then you might be the victim of your own self-fulfilling prophecy. So let's go back over these items really quick for your study skills success. Step one is to find the right space. Remember that you want to find a place that's quiet, has good light, and it doesn't have to be the same space every day. One day you might find you do better when you sit outside on your porch, and the next day you might want to go to a coffee shop. Step 2 is don't multitask. Remember to put your phone away. Step 3 is to set your schedule and stick to it. Remember to post that schedule somewhere so your family and friends can hold you accountable. Step 4 is to be an active learner, constantly doing something while you're learning. And step 5 is to take effective notes, which is part of being an active learner. Step 6 is to review those notes. But remember, you don't just review your notes, you also have to do step 7, which is assess yourself. Step 8 is to explain it to someone, even if you don't fully understand it. Step 9 is to find other resources that obviously we all know that dry textbooks don't always speak to us. So if you can find something else that's more interesting to you, do it. And step 10 is to rest and exercise. Here are my sources if you're interested. So before we get to questions, I just want to let you know that on March 3rd, my colleague John is going to conduct this same webinar, but with his own twist, and he's going to do it in Spanish. So please feel free to share this information with anyone you know. And then in 2 weeks, I'll be back again doing another webinar about critical thinking and research skills. So I hope you'll join me for that. Back to Lauren.
Thank you, Amy. That was wonderful as always. And for those of you who maybe have attended these sessions before or not, I always say I'm not a student currently, though I've been a student many times. And Amy's tips are actually really helpful for me, even in my job and sitting down to my desk each day and making sure I'm organized. So I think even if some of you are maybe balancing both, being a student and working, or helping your kids if you happen to have kids too, I think there's a lot of great tips here.
True.
So we would love to take some questions. So if you want to put questions into the question box, I will ask them and have Amy address them. Let me see what we have so far. Amy, it looks like there was a question, and I'm not sure if you'll need more detail, but there was a question about work study. What if you're in work study, and how do you apply some of the study tips, I guess, to being in that kind of setting?
Yeah, maybe whoever wrote that could give me a little bit more information on what they mean by that. That would be great.
Awesome. Okay. Another question is, what should you do if you are behind on multiple subjects, but have to work on, current assignments and projects?
That's a good one. Well, the first thing to do is, I always think it's important to reach out to your professor or your instructor, whatever, and let them know that you realize you've fallen behind. You're going to do your best to catch up. Make sure that's okay with them. In this day and age, with all that's going on in the world, I think most colleges, universities, any school really is being, really understanding of the fact that people are falling behind for many reasons. So make sure that it's okay that you do the work, because it would be a terrible thing to go back and try to make up work and then have your professor not accept it. But then the best thing to do is really set out that schedule like I was talking about. And, it's going to be a little more heavy for you, but what you want to do is try to stay on top of what is due, unless your professor says, hey, go back and that's fine. You can start back whatever week you missed and work your way to now. But what I usually tell my students is I want you to turn in your assignments that are due on the day they're due from here on out, but you can go back and finish your other assignments. Let's work out a plan. Okay, so you missed week 1. How about if you turn in week 1 this week and then turn in the week 2 assignment next week or whatever, and we work out a plan together. But if you don't have someone like that working with you, just make your own schedule and set it up that I'm going to do this assignment, and then I'm going to sit down and do this next assignment. I'm going to take a break in between. I'm going to get 2 assignments done in a day instead of 1, or whatever it might be. So the schedule is important, and it's really important to hold yourself to it, post it, make sure that other people know, hey, I'm really focusing on this right now. I got to catch up in this class, and you'll be surprised how many people will gather around you and support you.
Awesome. Next question. And I think this is really relevant for us because we do tutoring, but what if I cannot grasp the subject information? Maybe I didn't quite grasp the basics. I'm struggling with that word today, but
right.
But I think, just as a reminder here, obviously this session was not about Tutor.com as a service, but many of you found out about this webinar because you have access to Tutor.com through your library, through your school, through your employer, through the military, and so on. We work with so many partners out there that offer the service to students. So tutors are a great place to get some extra help, right? Go back to the basics. They can give you one-on-one attention. So, and more broadly, beyond tutors, teachers and instructors are there to help. And sometimes I think we're a little afraid to ask for help, but go ask them for some practice problems. That's just my tips, but let's ask the expert here what she thinks.
Oh, I completely agree with the tutoring thing, because that's a really good way to go back and get your foundational skills and have someone walk you through the parts that you don't know. But it's also, yes, it's also good to talk to your professor, because they may say, hey, there's this really good YouTube channel that I find, does this, and this. Why don't you try that? That could be like just an invaluable resource. Or they may have, certain things recorded that they can share with you. I don't know if it would be helpful to watch a lecture again, because like I told you, most of the time that doesn't work, but it depends on the subject. It's possible that if it's like learning a certain math skill, that maybe it would be okay to rewatch a lecture, and they might have that for you. So I would definitely ask your professor to help you, but I would also highly recommend tutoring.
There's actually a parallel question here that I think is really interesting for you to comment on. So it is sometimes said that asking for help is something to be ashamed of. What is your personal perspective?
Well, yes, I completely disagree. And I can tell you why. As a professor myself, I can tell you that I have a lot of respect for students who ask for help. I have a lot of respect for the students who take the time to say, I don't know if I fully understand this assignment and I really want to do well on it. Can you explain it to me? What exactly are you looking for? I love those kinds of questions. And honestly, when I go to read that student's paper, I remember that. I remember that student cared so much that they wanted to get it right, that they asked me. So I see someone asking questions as I see it as a strength. I see it as somebody who really cares, somebody who's putting in the time, really thinking about it. And a lot of times those students are ones that come to me early in the week. If assignments due on Sunday, I'll get emails from students on like Tuesday. And I'm so impressed with that. Like, I'm so glad that you're doing it and you're not waiting until the night before, right? So I think it's absolutely a sign of strength. And I think it's also a sign that you really want to learn. And I think it's important to no longer view that as a sign of weakness at all. I mean, we want to learn and be successful and do well. That's what this is all about, student success. So what do you have to do to get there? And it doesn't necessarily have to be your professor either. I mean, some professors are super intimidating. I know that. So, if you probably have all kinds of resources at your school, whether it's an advisor or a librarian or other people who have so much expertise, or a tutor. So it would be fine to ask other people too, if that is easier maybe for you.
Yeah, and just to echo that, obviously at Tutor.com, our whole organization is built around helping students. We have tutors available around the clock who are there just to help with that. That's the whole reason that, we exist is for students who need help in that moment or just want to bounce ideas off of another person. And that's what tutors are there for, is to create that space for you to ask questions. But beyond us, institutions, whether you're at a college or a university or you are in high school or middle school, your schools have counselors and teachers and support systems, tutoring centers, writing centers, the library, of course. They're all there built around the notion of helping, and people love to share their expertise. So I think the power of asking questions is really important, and always ask for help. It's there for you.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay, so there's so many questions coming in. I don't know that we'll get through all of them, but we will try to get through as many as we can in the next few minutes, and then we'll try to have an FAQ that we do for some of these webinars. How do you push through with studying when you have no motivation and you feel overwhelmed and exhausted?
Well, there's such thing as knowing your limits. So as much as I would say to a student a year ago or a year and a half ago, push through, get through, don't stop, you can do this. The world is different. now. And I sometimes I do have a student who recently reached out to me and shared all these things that she was going through and said, I'm really, worried that I'm not going to finish this class. And honestly, when I read it all, my first thought was, poor girl, like, just give yourself a break. Take this semester off or drop this class. Like, that's what I wanted to tell her. And I did tell her, it's not too late to drop this class. At that moment, that's what I felt she needed to hear. And then of course I worked with her. She did, she missed an assignment, and actually she's come back pretty strong. She's still in the class. So, but you have to know your limits. And if you are feeling completely overwhelmed and your mental health is at stake here, then I think that's okay to tell yourself, I can't do it right now. I want to say that first and foremost. My first instinct before the pandemic would have been to say, hey, go take a good weekend, totally refresh, walk away from your work, pamper yourself in some way, get some exercise and some fresh air, and tell yourself that on Monday you're going to start over and you're going to work hard and you're going to get through it, and you're going to set small goals for yourself and you're going to accomplish each goal. That's what I would say is, like, a week or two at a time, a class or two at a time, set small goals and just say, I can do it. But then know when to stop and take a little break, even if it's a weekend or a day. Take a day off of work, like for mental health, and do no schoolwork on that day, and just take that time. And I do think that's important in this day and age to do both. But if you're not motivated, it's really, really hard to get yourself motivated if you're not seeing it. So remind yourself, why are you doing this in the first place? Why do you want this degree? Or why do you want to finish this class? What is it that you started for? Is that still your goal? And if it's still your goal, why is that not motivating you? Ask yourself these tough questions.
Okay, next question. I have a history class that builds on subjects rapidly, and I have a hard time keeping up. I get all panicky because I'm trying to go all the way back to something that is an embarrassingly long time ago that just doesn't connect. Any tips? So I guess that's the question of, don't do the cramming, right? But the things that build upon each other.
Yeah, that's one where it is important to remember old things. So, I think that the best thing to do is start now with really good note taking, draw maps and things like that in your notes from here on forward. But if you need to remember old stuff, yeah, you might need to Google it and try to find different ways to learn it. Because obviously whatever it was originally, whether you read it or you watched a lecture or something like that, didn't connect. So I wouldn't bother trying to do that again. But I would look for different ways to learn the information, and then try taking better notes again. Start over with your notes. And that might mean that you're just drawing little pictures and you're just trying to get just a base. Like, I wouldn't spend hours and hours on doing something that you should have done, 6 weeks ago, but maybe some
Uh-oh, I wonder if we lost Amy there. I think we may have lost her audio for the end of the session here, though she was giving us a very good answer, unless I'm the one that lost audio. Yeah, it looks like Amy might have lost audio. Let's give her a second, see if she can get back on, but otherwise we may have to wrap up the session for this evening. I recognize there's a whole bunch of other questions here, and so again, what we'd like to do is try to get an FAQ together, and then we'll try to post that out on some of our social media channels. As you see up on the screen, all of these social media channels are good to follow because we post about the events that we host, including the student success workshops, but we host other kinds of webinars too, for parents, for educators, and so on. We also post every single session to our YouTube channel. You can see there, Tutor.com/YouTube webinars. That has a lot of the ones we've hosted in the past, and we'll have this recording coming up over the next couple days as well. So if you want to check out those recordings, you're very welcome to do so, and then of course share them as well. So thank you again for all attending. I'm sorry we weren't able to get to all the questions, but we appreciate your participation. We hope it was helpful, and have a good rest of the evening.